Hey there, my name is Katie Morgan. I am an indie fantasy author, editor, and longtime anime fan, and welcome to Let's Write With, the series where we use the power of anime to become better writers. If you're tired of high-level writing advice that doesn't do much other than continue to pit plotters against pantsers, you're in the right place. In this series, we take a more organic approach by looking at what other people are doing, stealing their good ideas, and figuring out how to hopefully avoid their mistakes. As you may have heard, the second season of the Tower of God anime is currently running on Crunchyroll, so in honor of that, we're going to take a look at the original manhwa version of the story arc that the anime is currently covering, basically everything having to do with the workshop battle, and see what writing tips we can take away from that. But first, let's do a little bit of housekeeping. First off, you should know that I've already done a video on the first season of the Tower of God anime. I'll leave a link in the cards or the description, or possibly both. I do recommend that you check out that video before you watch this one. I'll try to provide some context as we go along, but it would be really helpful if you already have some familiarity with the story up to this point, either through the anime or the manhwa, or both. And as you were probably expecting, here is your spoiler warning for the workshop battle arc in the Tower of God manhwa. That's episodes 0 to about 110 of the second season of the webcomic. And let's do a spoiler warning for season 1 as well, although I'm not going to be focusing on that quite so much, except where it's necessary to understand what's going on in season 2. Finally, it seems like there's a lot of back and forth in terms of how various names are pronounced in Tower of God, especially given all of the different translations and localizations. All I can say to that is I'm trying my best, and I hope you can bear with me. Okay, now that that's out of the way, let's talk story. 6 years after our hero Bom's supposed death, a regular named Wagnan is on his last chance to beat the test on the 20th floor of the tower. Having more or less signed away his life to a loan shark in order to be able to afford the test, Wagnan really needs to come through this time. Things get complicated when one of the test participants turns out to be Viole Grace, an extremely powerful monosyllabic member of a crime syndicate known as Fug. Viole is being trained as a Slayer candidate, basically an assassin whose job is to kill Jihad, the corrupt king of the tower. So he is not a guy you want to cross. Circumstances force Viole and Wagnan onto a team together, along with a motley group of regulars, each with their own reasons for climbing the tower. As the team begins to enter found family territory, it becomes clear that Viole's reasons for being involved with Fug aren't what Wagnan and the others thought. Because, in a pretty clearly telegraphed twist, it turns out that Viole is actually Bom, who has been blackmailed into working for Fug in order to keep his Season 1 friends safe. The only way to help Bom break free is for Wagnan's team to win the dangerous and extremely competitive workshop battle on the 30th floor of the tower. However, Fug isn't about to play fair when it comes to their prize Slayer candidate, not to mention all of the dangerous and powerful weapons available to the winners of the workshop battle. It's going to take all of Bom's ingenuity and skills, and those of his friends, both old and new, to prevent total disaster. In this video, we're going to take a look at 3 different story elements and try to pick apart how they're working or not working and what we can take away to help with our own writing. We'll be discussing world-building expansion, character progression, and tension and payoff. World-building expansion. There's a special sort of complication that comes with world-building for a sequel. On the one hand, you want your audience to experience a feeling of familiarity, like they're returning to a world they know and love. On the other hand, it's a great opportunity to expand your world and make it richer and more robust. Tower of God is a story with a lot of world building, and Season 2 is where we really start to dig into the complexities of the world. Now, some world building aspects of Season 1 do carry over. Regulars like Wagnan and his team are people who choose to climb the tower in hopes of attaining their goals once they reach the top. Irregulars like Bom are aberrations, whom the tower allows in for its own purposes, often to cause significant upheaval and change. And the characters climbing the tower have all learned to manipulate a magical substance called Shinsu, and everyone has their own particular skill or position in relation to it. But the workshop battle also brings in a lot of new lore and world building. The tower. One of the biggest thematic elements to come up in relation to this season's world building is the way that the tower has been built specifically to be very grueling and heartbreaking. This was definitely hinted at in Season 1, but it's much more fleshed out this season. Corrupt systems. When we meet Wagnan on the 20th floor, we see firsthand how the system is set up to encourage failure. The 20th floor is where a lot of regulars choke and give up on climbing the tower altogether. Some of this has to do with the difficulty and expense of the floor test, but some of it is just regulars being worn down by seeing all of their friends die due to the realities of the tower. There's even a name for it: 20th floor disorder. The first section of this arc really drives home just how brutal the tower can be in this regard. In episode 1, Wagner befriends a young regular named Nia, who works as a food delivery boy for a restaurant on the 20th floor. Nia ends up joining Wagner in taking the test and continuing up the tower. However, Wagner soon learns that Nia only did this because he's under the thumb of the same loan shark organization that targeted Wagner. After giving up on his own dream of climbing the tower, Nia went to work for a kind restaurant owner who couldn't pay the protection money demanded of her. In order to protect her, Nia agreed to betray Wagner and help the loan shark Lurker win the test. However, the betrayal doesn't do much good. Lurker kills Nia while Wagner and his friends are forced to listen. This sequence of events is brutal and sad, and it clearly shows us how little mercy there is in the tower. And this is just one of many corrupt systems. Because we're also introduced to the Workshop, host of the Workshop Battle, which is ostensibly a technological powerhouse that provides fantastic weapons and items to the regulars climbing the tower. In reality, though, the Workshop is conducting sinister human experiments in an effort to build a living ignition weapon, basically a merger between a powerful human being and a powerful weapon. This is why several characters Bam meets, including his new friend Horyang, have extraordinary powers and have led miserable lives. This also has a huge impact on Bam himself, but we'll come back to that in a little bit. Previous generation. The Workshop Battle arc also introduces some bigger picture backstory for the world. In episode 31, Bam meets the ridiculously powerful irregular Eric Mazzino, a powerhouse who's been hinted at since the earliest episodes of the manhwa. Their ensuing fight involves some interesting dialogue about the purpose of Fug, as well as Mazzino's desire to leave the tower altogether. Mazzino might seem like just a snarky dude bro, but he and his position in the tower tell us a lot about how different factions in the tower are itching for change, and how they might destroy each other trying to make that happen. This arc also briefly introduces the story of Enru, a mysterious irregular who killed a floor administrator many years ago. A strange weapon called the Thorn was found where the battle took place, and this becomes extremely important for Bam specifically. We also meet Pobedao Gustang, the crafty head of one of the ruling 10 great families, who becomes an important player in the story in the Workshop Battle and beyond. All of this additional lore gives us an expanded picture of the history and tensions within the tower, and it provides the hook of several unsolved mysteries to keep the reader reading. Fug. The introduction of Fug is probably one of the most important world-building expansions in this arc. In episode 3, Goseng, who ends up becoming one of Bam's and Wagnan's teammates, knows that the floral pattern on Bam's outfit indicates that he's a Slayer candidate from Fug. The group is referred to as a crime syndicate that wants to take out King Jihad and the 10 great families who control the tower. Fug definitely has a reputation, with its members often killing or helping regulars in order to suit the whims of the organization's elders. They even get involved with manipulating floor tests when necessary. But the tricky thing about Fug is that, as far as we know, the goal of the organization is to depose a corrupt king. So even though they're killing and manipulating people throughout the tower, they're ostensibly doing it because they want to fix the power imbalance that allows Jihad and the 10 great families to control everyone else. Of course, it's unclear whether they want to do that out of the goodness of their hearts or just so that they can rule instead, as Mazzino suggests. And even if we give them the benefit of the doubt, it's impossible to forget that Fug is the brains behind Bam's fake death and 6 years of suffering and abuse. Then again, you can't really deny that Fug makes Bam stronger, providing the requisite shonen action hero power-up between seasons 1 and 2. If it weren't for Fug, Bam likely wouldn't have been able to gain the skills we see him rock throughout season 2 and beyond. But what really makes Fug interesting is that it's a narrative challenge to the concept of good versus evil. Several of the Fug members we meet become Bam's allies over time, and while they definitely have their own interests at heart first and foremost, they also appear to be genuinely concerned about Bam and willing to go out on a limb to help him and his friends, at least sometimes. The situation is also complicated by the fact that Fug has broken into factions based on complicated internal politics. Some of the groups want to empower Bam to be their god and wielder of the mysterious thorn so that he can kill Jihad. Others want to literally melt him down and combine his power with the thorns in order to create a weapon that someone else can wield on Fug's behalf. TOG's complex world building is a good example of how an author can use their world to build tension and drama. It also offers some great opportunities for character growth, which we'll discuss in the next section. Writing takeaways on Worldbuilding Expansion. 1. Worldbuilding for a sequel has some unique challenges. There's a need to make things similar, but also different, and that can be hard to balance. I think the key is to consider how you can invite your readers back into a world they already know and love, while also giving them the opportunity to learn more about it. You don't want to bore them with info dumps, but you can build on what they already know with a steady drip of new and interesting context. 2. World building isn't just about setting, it's also about how setting and its rules can affect your characters and plot. Exploring the systems in your world can be a great way to build tension and conflict. For example, are your characters numb to the negative aspects of the world around them, or do they choose to fight? 3. It can be really engaging for a story to go beyond the basics of good versus evil and explain why and how a character got that way. World building can play a big role in this. After all, we're heavily shaped by the world we live in. What does your world say about your characters' choices and where they fall on the moral spectrum? And how can you mine that for interesting conflict and character development? Character progression. Season 2 of Tower of God introduces a lot of fun new characters, and it goes a little deeper with some of the original ones. I don't want to eat up all the time in this video talking about every character. Well, I do, but I also don't want to bore you, so let's just focus on 3 that are integral to this specific story arc. Wagnon. It's no easy task to start a new season with a time jump and a completely new cast. You need to be really careful that your new protagonist is just as engaging and interesting as your original one. I'd argue that Wagnon is a really good choice here. He's a very charming character with compelling goals who heavily influences the people around him. Idealism. Not long after we meet Wagnon, he finds himself in the unenviable position of signing away his organs in order to be able to afford taking the 20th floor test one last time. As he tells Nia, however, he's prepared to do whatever it takes to keep climbing because working hard toward his goals is what matters most to him. But his idealism also has a practical bent. For example, while he's clearly terrified of Bomb upon their first meeting, and rightly so since Bomb just killed several guys, he also realizes tactically that he needs to get on Bomb's good side in order to pass the test, so he offers to team up. And even though he's furious with Lurker after Nia's murder, Wagnon still maintains some of that practical idealism. He initially wants to kill Lurker, going so far as to seek out Bomb, the quote-unquote most evil guy in the tower. However, when he actually gets a shot at Lurker, Wagnon stops and considers that Lurker is just one part of the system that encourages regulars to think that hurting people doesn't matter as long as you can keep climbing the tower. If Wagnon was able to forgive Nia for tricking him, maybe that means he should try to forgive Lurker too. Wagnon is clearly not okay with how things went down, but he ultimately decides it's more important to fix the tower rather than get petty revenge on one person and perpetuate the cycle of hate. Later, when Bomb asks why Wagnon forgave Lurker, Wagnon says it's because he wants people to be willing to forgive him too. He hates that the tower puts up walls between people, and he'd rather bring people together. Now, your mileage may vary in terms of whether or not you agree with Wagnon's life philosophy. But from a writing perspective, it's interesting to see him move from someone who talks the talk to someone who's willing to make difficult decisions in order to live up to his own ideals. Leadership. Wagnon also grows in terms of his leadership abilities, especially in relation to his team, aka Team Sweet and Sour. During one of the early tests, Wagnon's teammate Goseng mentions that she never had much confidence in her ability to climb the tower and always just assumed she'd fail. However, after meeting Wagnon, she's dedicated to climbing the tower with everyone, although she's adamant that Wagnon is not her mentor, even if he did inspire her. This is an interesting companion to Nia's comment about Wagnon inspiring him to go back to climbing the tower after he'd given up. Wagnon may have been left behind by his original friends after they gave up on climbing the tower, but now his determination is inspiring others and bringing them closer as a team. Like a good leader, he also sees opportunities to help others be the best they can be. And he's willing to admit his error of judgment once he learns what Bomb is going through and to offer his support and friendship. In fact, one of the main reasons Team Sweet and Sour enters the workshop battle to help Bomb is because Wagnon follows up on the information about Bomb's past that he gets from the Fug guide Huaren in episode 35. After hearing the details, Wagner decides to prioritize freeing Bomb from Fug and getting him back to his Season 1 friends. This includes agreeing to work with Kuhn, Bomb's best friend, when they finally meet up. Although I'm guessing that there are times when Wagner regrets that decision. Wagner is originally introduced as this kind of silly guy with ridiculous goals. But he's actually really tenacious and insightful and really good at inspiring others. And he really comes into his own over the course of this arc. Bomb/Viole. In my first video on Tower of God, I talked about Bomb as a static character. In other words, a character who doesn't really change himself, but whose steadfastness inspires the people around him. Well, Season 2 marks the beginning of some changes for Bomb as a character, although I think at his core he's still the stubborn cinnamon roll we met in Season 1. Slayer candidate. Bomb's transformation into Fug Slayer candidate Ju Viole Grace isn't exactly natural character progression. After all, he's being forced into it against his will. That said, the situation does show how he develops coping mechanisms that affect how he interacts with the world. It's clear from the beginning that Bomb has given up on the wide-eyed, gentle persona of Season 1, either on purpose or because of the trauma of the past 6 years. Instead, he's become primarily non-verbal and emotionless. He has very few facial expressions, and he hides his eyes behind his emo bangs more often than not. As a Slayer candidate, Bomb is prepared to take down anyone who gets in his way with as little fuss as possible. He doesn't seem to enjoy killing people, even if he is really, really good at it. However, whereas Season 1 Bomb might have hesitated, Season 2 Bomb doesn't have that luxury, given that his friends' lives are on the line if he fails. Bomb is also a significantly more powerful Shinsu user than he was in Season 1, and he knows it. His first fights with future teammates Arkraptor and Horyang go pretty consistently in his favor, and he only takes a hit from Wagner because of a quirk of Bomb's armor. And the fight only ends because of the test time limit. However, it's worth noting that despite his increased strength and skills, Bomb isn't interested in beating people up just because he can. When challenged by other regulars for no reason, he refuses to fight. Even with Fug's training, he's not interested in throwing his weight around. And speaking of Fug's training, let's talk a little bit about what they want from Bomb and how this affects him. Fug's god. We learn through flashbacks that Bomb is seen by many in Fug as their god, a powerful irregular who can bypass the rules of the tower and might actually have a chance of killing King Jihad. In fact, Bomb's mentor Jinsung literally says he's going to teach Bomb to become a god. This is actually a recurring theme, with characters referring to Bomb throughout the arc as their god, despite the fact that it obviously makes him uncomfortable. For example, during an early phase in the workshop battle itself, a group of regulars try to pave the way for Bomb to win, with the idea of turning on him in the end. Bomb is deeply unamused, saying he'll pass the test with his own power. When he asks if he's still their god, even when it's inconvenient for them, they attack and he takes them out. Even when people he's come to rely on, like the guide Huaren, are the ones referring to him as a god, Bomb takes exception because he wants to make his own choices. All of this culminates in Bomb's final confrontation with Reflejo, the Fug member who wants to kill Bomb rather than let him gain control over the Thorn, the powerful mythological item I mentioned earlier. When Reflejo tells Bomb he isn't his god, Bomb agrees, calls the whole god thing a cop-out, and says he quits. It's an interesting way to show how Bomb's stubbornness and desire to help other people on his own terms are still driving factors of his character. Because despite the changes, in many ways, Bomb is still who he's always been, someone who loves his friends and is prepared to tear himself apart in order to protect them. Protector. While I don't think it's ever outright stated whether Bomb himself knows the details, it's clear that whatever team he manages to put together will be vetted by Fug and potentially killed if Fug doesn't think they're up to muster. This might explain why Bomb is initially so standoffish and unwilling to accept new teammates despite the complications it causes. However, once Bomb has accepted Team Sweet and Sour as his friends, maybe due in part to the fact that Jinsung gives his blessing, which means they'll be slightly safer than they would be otherwise, Bomb includes them in the circle of people he's prepared to go to bat for no matter what the situation. Even if that situation is protecting them from the legendary Eric Mazzino. The Mazzino fight includes Bomb's iconic speech about not needing the things that motivate other characters in the series. Stars, a crown, and the sky don't appeal to him. He just wants to protect his friends. This carries over into everything Bomb does to look out for his Season 1 friends as well. He actively tries to hide his identity and avoid possible interaction because he knows the deal with Fug is that he can't be in touch with his original team or Fug will kill them. In fact, when he and Kun encounter each other at the Hand of Arlene, Bam does his best to get out of the situation before he can be recognized. And when Fug member Jaja blackmails Bam and presumably kills both Kun and Hwoarang anyway, Bam is devastated. Bam's ultimate decision to stop doing what Fug says and actively participate in his own rescue has a lot to do with him understanding that his friends are going to be in danger no matter what he does, especially since Fug is actively sabotaging the agreement thanks to the multiple factions fighting against each other in order to control him. In the end, pretty much all of Bam's actions in this season are about fulfilling his need to protect the people he cares about. Sure, Fug has remade him into a badass, but he's really only interested in using those skills to help his friends. Kun. I haven't really talked a lot about Bam's original group of friends yet because, while they remain awesome, they don't really go through a whole lot of character progression during this arc. One arguable exception to this is Kun, Bam's best friend and strategist, who has been very busy in Bam's absence. The Long Con. When Kun re-enters the story in episode 22, he's separated off from the original group and started his own team with the goal of helping Rachel, Bam's first friend, climb the tower. Like all of Bam's friends, Kun believes that Bam is dead, which makes it Kun's job to fulfill Bam's wish of helping Rachel go up the tower. However, as we soon learn, things aren't exactly what they seem. Because Kun knows Rachel is lying about her injury, and helping her is part of a long con to confirm his suspicion that she had something to do with Bam's death. Which, if you'll recall from season 1, she absolutely does. The only other person who knows what's going on is Shibisu, another of Bam's season 1 friends, who is currently leading the original team on a different floor. Now, Kun's always been a snarky, plotty kind of guy, but this plot hits a little differently. Shibisu's voiceover in episode 25 suggests that Kun got the job of looking after Rachel because Kun is the cruelest of the original team. But the situation is a little more complicated when you consider what's actually going on here. Because Kun has basically been playing nice for 6 years with the person he thinks killed someone he really cares about. Yes, it's just the sort of con that he's into. But it's also clear that Kun is still grieving Bam's supposed death and feeling bad on some level about plotting to take out someone he knows is important to Bam. You might remember from the door test in season 1 that Kun's greatest enemy tends to be feelings, usually those related to trauma. But now, even more than before, he takes refuge in clinging to the facts. When faced with potential evidence from the AI Emily that Bam is still alive, Kun is clearly taken aback but assumes that this is some sort of trick. It's not until he actually catches a glimpse of Bam at the Hand of Arlene, and is summarily blown up and left for dead thanks to Fug shenanigans, that Kun begins to think there might be some truth to this whole Bam is still alive thing. Although he's skeptical enough that he's still putting the pieces together while literally unconscious after the explosion. From then on, however, there's an interesting shift in the way that Kun deals with the situation. Loner to leader. Kun has always acted like the power behind the throne. He's the guy who manipulated his family of manipulators in order to decide which of his sisters got to become a powerful princess of Jihad. And he spends much of season 1 orchestrating elaborate cons. But those manipulations involved Kun primarily making plans on his own. As of the workshop battle arc, he's moving into new territory, namely allowing himself to lean on others for help. The attempt to trap Rachel is something Kun plans from the start with Shibisu. Kun also relies on his new team, particularly Novik and Ran, to support him. Now, it's worth noting that Kun's decision to trust others does backfire to a certain extent. While Ran, Novik, and new recruit Dan do turn out to be extremely loyal and supportive, Kun's teammates Apple and Michael turn out to be in league with Rachel and a faction of Fug, which leads to Kun nearly getting killed at the Hand of Arlene showdown. But the result of all of this is Kun beginning to show some real leadership qualities as opposed to just ordering people around to carry out his plots. After surviving Arlene's hand only to find his team broken by Rachel's betrayal, Kun takes responsibility and apologizes to Dan, whom Rachel severely injured. Kun could have just written this off as an embarrassing loss that's part of a bigger game. Instead, he takes it to heart and becomes determined to find a way to make up for the fact that the people he was in charge of got hurt. This continues over into the big plan for Kun's and Wagnan's teams to come together to rescue Bam from the workshop battle. Sure, Kun is still bossy and manipulative, but he also tries to be somewhat supportive, including helping Wagner go back for teammates Prince and Misang even after he claimed he wouldn't. Kun has always been more of a softie than he lets on, but the workshop battle is where we begin to see that more clearly, both in terms of how he treats his teammates and how he leads them. He's probably always going to be the kind of character who prefers to plot alone, but that doesn't mean he's not also learning how to rely on others. Writing takeaways on character progression. 1. When it comes to sequels, it's important to ask yourself how your characters have grown or not grown. Are they still driven by the same principles, or have things changed since we last saw them? How well or badly have they been dealing with obstacles? Answering questions like these can help your readers feel both reconnected to the characters they love and intrigued by what's different. 2. The trick with introducing new characters in later parts of the story is to show how their personalities and goals mesh with those of the original characters you had your readers following. How does a plot throw people together, and how does it tear them apart? You're probably always going to have people getting impatient while waiting for their faves to reappear, but in the meantime, it can be really engaging to see how the new characters build relationships with the older ones. 3. Assuming you want your characters to grow, and you almost certainly do, one thing to consider is why they might need or want to grow. Are they faced with newer, bigger challenges? Are they moving toward a larger goal? Growth probably isn't going to be quick or easy, but if you build off of what your audience has seen the characters go through before, it can be pretty darn exciting. Tension and payoff. If you've seen any of the other videos in this series, you know that I talk a lot about things like tension, payoff, consequences, and catharsis. That's because these things are vital to good storytelling, but they can be kind of hard to define, which makes digging into specific examples really helpful. As a whole, I think Tower of God does some things really well, and some things less well when it comes to tension and payoff. Identity. The reveal that Viole is Bomb isn't exactly unexpected. In fact, it's pretty obvious from the start, based solely on his character design. Sure, the long hair and perpetual frown make him look different, but it's clearly him. Add in the fact that Viole is a wave controller, which is Bomb's position, and that he has a dream/memory about Rachel, and there's really no doubt about who this mysterious man is. Even Bomb's old friends seem to almost immediately have an inkling about what's up. Kun recognizes Bomb's reverse flow control skill and the brief sound of his real voice. Dorsey thinks he looks familiar and also recognizes his attacks. Anak notes that Viole's eyes and attack style are similar to Bomb's, and Rock recognizes Bomb as soon as he's able to corner him. And yet, the narrative doesn't actually confirm Bomb's identity until Bomb's mentor Jinsung refers to him by his real name in episode 27, a weird choice for Jinsung, who pretty much only ever calls Bomb Viole. So you could argue that this is a situation where the tension and payoff are pretty unimpressive. If the big payoff here is meant to be the reveal of Bomb's identity, it comes as a bit of an afterthought, like the author already knows that we know and just sort of remembered a bit belatedly to confirm it. And he does it in a way that's a little out of character for the person doing the reveal. However, you could also argue that the big payoff moment here is not the reveal of Bomb's identity, but the question of how he ended up in this situation. Because even if we know Viole is Bomb pretty early on, there's still a question of how the adorable hobbit from season 1 became the emo powerhouse of season 2. And the short flashbacks and small info drops over the course of many episodes do a good job of building that picture and building tension at the same time. Bomb's brief dream of Rachel in episode 5, Hwaran's reveal to Wagner about Fug's involvement in episode 35, the several flashbacks to Bomb's training with Fug just after they faked his death, all help build a solid picture of the trauma Bomb has been through and why he's doing what he's doing now. All of this culminates in Bomb's face-off with Fug baddie Reflejo at the end of the arc, where we see him come into his own power and choose to fight on his own terms. So the tension and payoff for Bomb's identity have their pros and cons depending on your point of view. Personally, I think it might have been a better idea to focus more on the slow reveal of Bomb's situation rather than dragging out the confirmation of his identity, but your mileage may vary. Reunion. I don't think I've ever been so anxious when reading something as I was when I read the workshop battle arc for the first time. I really needed to know when were Bomb and his friends going to be reunited. Now, making your audience wait on a reunion can be a great way to build really juicy tension. But if the many webtoon comments were any indication, Audiences were getting a little annoyed with how long it was taking. So let's address the two big story questions here. How good was the tension and build up to the reunion, and how good was the payoff? Building tension. Bam is introduced as Viole pretty quickly in episode 1, but it takes quite a while for the rest of the original cast to return. Kun and Rachel don't show up until over 20 episodes in. Shibisu, Endorsi, Anak, and Hats appear briefly here and there, but don't really get involved until closer to the workshop battle itself. And poor Rock isn't introduced until about halfway through the arc. Now, there are some pros to not letting the original cast come back together right away. For example, we get to see Bam forming relationships with new characters without the old characters overshadowing them. But there are also moments where the narrative tries to hold off the reunion in ways that get a little awkward. As fun as the showdown at Arlene's Hand is in episode 49, there's no real reason for the initial fight between Bam, Novik, and Ran beyond needing to drag out the tension and make sure they can't share notes about what's really going on. Novik has plenty of time to refute the accusation that he and Ran killed Horyang. Yes, Jaja makes the situation worse by lying about Horyang being dead in the first place, but there's no reason for Novik to immediately give up on trying to explain and just get straight into the fight, especially since he explains it right after Bam wins. This leads into the almost meeting between Kun and Bam in episode 50, which is honestly something I've gone back and forth on in terms of whether or not it works as a tension builder. On the one hand, the scene itself is really fun and uses dramatic irony well. We know that if Kun figures out what's going on, it could endanger everyone. But Kun doesn't know any of that, which means that the fact that he so easily reads through Bam's act heightens the tension really well. But here's the tricky part, because this scene, while super fun, is also just one more way to put off the true reunion. There's clear evidence here about Bam's identity, despite his attempts to hide it. Kun calls him on his evil act, recognizes his skills, and immediately knows his voice when he hears it unaltered, just as Jaja goes back on her word and blows the place up. So the fact that Kun is still putting together the pieces and questioning whether this is really Bam up until several episodes later when Hwaran confirms it feels like maybe the narrative is trying a bit too hard. Although I can't say that Kun needing proper citations is out of character. Anyway, the narrative keeps building and building until providing payoff. The situation at Arlene's Hand and Kun's apparent death bring Bam's friend Rock out into the open to find out what the heck is going on. As usual, Rock refuses to beat around the bush. In episode 67, one of my favorite episodes in the entire manhwa, he confronts Kun about getting on with saving Bam already. This episode has a ton of great payoff for Kun and Rock's relationship, as well as their respective relationships with Team Sweet and Sour. The nature of the eventual reunion of the main trio of Bam, Rock, and Kun hinges primarily on the dynamics that play out in this episode. Rock sees a problem and wants to rush right in and deal with it. Kun sees all of the potential consequences, and he wants to have a plan first, and maybe a little time to overthink things. In the end, though, they're on the same page, come together with everyone, win the workshop battle, and save Bam. So how's the ultimate payoff for the reunion? Well, it depends on your point of view. Because a big part of payoff is not just how the literal plotline resolves itself, but also how the audience feels about it. Do they feel like the tension has been built in an interesting, realistic way? Do they feel like the resolution is satisfying and provides good payoff for all of the time and effort and energy they've invested in these characters and their relationships? And it's important to keep genre in mind. Tower of God is essentially the equivalent of a shonen action manga, which means the payoff for a particular plot point may very well be a big fight as opposed to a deeply emotional conversation. But I don't want to oversimplify things here because we do get some really great emotional moments in the series, and some really cool fights. In episode 67, which I will never shut up about, there's a lovely sequence toward the end where Kun essentially declares war on the workshop battle. The trio are shown in 3 separate but nearby panels, followed by a large panel, no dialogue, of Bam alone. It's a great subtle way of showing how close the reunion is while still making it clear that it hasn't happened yet. This leads to a series of small, cathartic payoffs for different combinations of characters. There's Rock's ill-advised trip to find Bam in episode 80, which includes a cute hug between Rock and Bam, and a nice moment where Endorsi realizes what's going on and takes control of the situation to get things done. And toward the end of the workshop battle, there's a repeated line, once from Kun and once from Rock, which shows their concern about Bam potentially disappearing now that they've finally found him. Bam responding firmly both times that he's not going anywhere is some nice emotional catharsis for their separation. And in terms of payoff battles, there's the final fight against Reflejo, which centers around all three members of the trio fighting together and doing what they do best. And finally, we end the arc on a panel of the trio zonked out together while the rest of their group parties to celebrate the end of the workshop battle. These are lovely little payoff moments for sure. My only critique of the payoff as a whole would be that it leaves a lot of emotional issues unresolved. For example, I wouldn't say the emotional and psychological effects of Bam's time with Fug are never addressed at all, but they're not really addressed in this arc. He's freed with the help of his friends, and that's basically it. And we never see Bam actually talk to his friends about what they've all been through during this 8-year period where they were apart. No discussion between Bam and Kun about Rachel or how she tried to kill Kun and his team. Or Bam's conflicted feelings about trying to find her. No discussion about Shibisu being involved with Kun's plan and keeping the others out of the loop. And no follow-up on Wagnan's comments about how Bam's place is with his original friends, not his new ones. Again, I understand that this is more of an action series, and so emotional nuance isn't necessarily the main focus. But there are some really lovely emotional character moments throughout the series. So given the emotional weight of this arc in particular, it's a little disappointing that the payoff tends to deal more with transactional things, moving from one plot point to the next, rather than dealing with the emotional fallout of the events. Writing takeaways on tension and payoff. 1. Building tension into a satisfying payoff is no easy task, especially since it's often something a reader will feel rather than be able to articulate. That's why it's important to think through all of your rising and falling action and consider if everything moves organically from where the characters start to where the story ends. 2. When building tension, you definitely want to put challenges in the way of your characters so they don't get to the conclusion too quickly. But be mindful of whether those obstacles are organic or if they're things you just threw in there to help drag out the inevitable. Remember, most audiences know when they're being manipulated, or at least they know when they're annoyed. 3. An epic final battle can be super fun, but don't forget the emotional aspects you have to tie up too. How did beating the baddie affect the hero's psyche? What does it mean for the characters who are separated to be together again? The best payoff is often a combination of both the physical and emotional stuff. Conclusion. So let's review what we've learned today, shall we? 1. World building for a sequel offers some great opportunities to invite your readers further into your world. Any additional history and politics you explore can provide a richer, more engaging experience for your audience. 2. World building is about more than just setting. It can also be the inspiration for lots of good conflict and character development. Creating complex systems and hierarchies, in addition to stuff like technology or magic, gives your characters more room to develop, and it gives your audience more room to get to know them. 3. Most characters spend a lot of time growing and changing, which makes sequels and second acts a good time to tell us where they are now and where they're headed. What new challenges does your MC face? What characters will they meet who will change their lives for the better, or worse? 4. Introducing new characters in later parts of the story can be a challenge, especially if your audience is more keen on hearing about what happened to their faves than meeting new people. That said, new characters can mean new relationships and a new spin on the characters your audience already knows and loves. So it's worth experimenting with how both new and old characters can enhance your story. 5. One of the most important and often difficult to define writing elements is the concept of good payoff. There is an element of subjectivity here, but it's definitely worth taking the time to closely observe when, where, and how you implement rising and falling action. Keeping an eye on these things can help give you a sense of whether or not your payoff is working in relation to the tension you've built. 6. Building up to your story's climax will obviously involve putting a lot of obstacles in your character's way. But it's important to make sure those obstacles are more than just excuses to hold things off until the big battle. What genuine conflicts and opposing views might prevent your MC from getting where they need to go? What sort of emotional impact might those obstacles have, and how can your MC learn from them? That's it for this video. Thanks so much for watching. If you've read the Tower of God manhwa or seen the anime and have any thoughts about the writing, I would love to chat in the comments. Also, as always, please feel free to leave me your recs for other anime to cover in this series. And if you like stories about clever magical people trapped in corrupt systems, you may want to check out my urban fantasy trilogy, The Compound series. It's got cranky empaths, magical conspiracies, and a bit of queer romance. Books 1 and 2 are available in ebook and paperback, and book 3 is on the way. More info on that below. Thanks again for watching, keep writing, and I'll see you in the next video.